They told her to stay in her lane. Side snipers needed to be tall, strong, loud enough to command respect in the field. Specialist Iris Calloway was none of those things, and the men in her unit made sure she knew it. But on a frozen morning, in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, when the Taliban pinned down an entire platoon and every shot had to count from 800 meters out, nobody was laughing anymore. They were just trying to stay alive long enough to see what the quiet girl could do. Iris Calloway was 29. Lean and angular, with dark hair she kept in a regulation bun and eyes that rarely met anyone's directly. She moved through forward, operating base sledgehammer like a shadow, someone you'd pass in the chow hall and forget 5 minutes later. Most soldiers assumed she was supply or admin. A few knew she was assigned to the Scout Sniper Platoon, attached to 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment. What they didn't know was that she held the highest qualification scores in her sniper school class, or that she could calculate windage and elevation adjustments faster than soldiers with twice her experience, or that she'd grown up in rural Wyoming where her father, a former Marine Scout sniper himself, had taught her to shoot before she could ride a bike. The FOB sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, a collection of HESCO barriers and prefab buildings that shook whenever the wind picked up. Winter had arrived early, and frost covered everything by dawn. Iris spent most of her time in the team room, meticulously cleaning her M110 rifle while the other snipers talked around her like she wasn't there. She'd learned not to mind being invisible. Sometimes it was easier that way. Iris grew up on 400 acres of Wyoming grassland where the nearest neighbor was 6 miles away. Her father, Marcus Calloway, had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine sniper. He came home with medals he never wore and skills he needed somewhere to put. He taught Iris because she was quiet enough to sit still for hours, patient enough to wait for the perfect moment, and curious enough to ask why wind mattered more than people thought. By age 12, she could hit a target at 500 yards. By 16, she was competing in long-range shooting competitions across the Mountain West, often the only girl in a field of adult men. She learned early that people underestimated her. They saw a skinny teenager with braces and assumed she was there because her daddy made her come. Then she'd outshoot everyone present, and they'd go quiet, unsure what to do with a girl who could make a rifle do things they couldn't. Her father taught her more than shooting. He taught her patience, discipline, and the mental mathematics of ballistics, how to read terrain and weather, how to control her breathing and heartbeat, how to make one shot count when everything depended on it. She joined the Army at 23 after her father died suddenly from a heart attack. She needed purpose, needed to honor what he'd taught her. When recruiters saw her civilian shooting credentials, they fast-tracked her to sniper training. She graduated top of her class, but the reputation didn't follow her to her first unit. Starting over meant proving herself all over again. And proving herself to men who didn't want to believe was harder than any shot she'd ever taken. Sergeant First Class Wade Harker ran the Scout Sniper Platoon like it was his personal kingdom. He was 6'2", built like he'd been carved from oak, with a voice that carried across the entire FOB. He'd been a sniper for 11 years and made sure everyone knew it. When Iris arrived, he looked her up and down and asked if she was lost. "I'm your new specialist," she said. "Iris Calloway." "I'm assigned to—" "I know who you are," Harker interrupted. "I also know you qualified at sniper school, which means absolutely nothing until you prove you can operate in combat. You'll be on observation duty until I say otherwise." Observation duty meant spotting for other snipers, calling wind and distance while someone else took the shot. It was critical work, but it wasn't shooting. Iris understood the logic. New team. Members needed to build trust. But weeks passed, then months, and Harker never rotated her into the shooter position. The other snipers followed his lead. Staff Sergeant Chun acted like she was a curiosity, something amusing but not serious. Specialist Donovan, who'd arrived just 2 months before her, openly questioned why the army was letting women into sniper positions at all. "She's gonna get someone killed," Donovan said one evening in the team room, loud enough for Iris to hear. "She doesn't have the strength to carry the gear on a long patrol. Doesn't have the aggression you need when things go bad." Harker didn't defend her. He just shrugged and said time would tell. The breaking point came during a training exercise. Harker set up a stress scenario, moving targets at various distances, wind gusting unpredictably, time limits that forced quick decisions. Each sniper took their turn. When Iris stepped up, Harker added extra constraints, smaller targets, less time, wind conditions he didn't brief her on. She hit every single target. Harker examined the results, then dismissed them. "Training isn't combat," he said. "Anyone can shoot paper." The message was clear. "Nothing she did would ever be enough. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to say something." Stories like Iris's matter because too many people do extraordinary things that nobody hears about. If you want more of these stories, hit that subscribe button. There are voices that deserve to be heard. Iris sat on her bunk that night, disassembling and reassembling her rifle by muscle memory. Her hands moved automatically while her mind replayed every interaction, every dismissal, every moment she'd been treated like a liability instead of an asset. She thought about her father, about the way he'd taught her that shooting was only half the job, the other half was mental. Staying calm when others panicked, trusting your training when doubt crept in, making the shot not because you wanted to prove something, but because someone's life depended on it. He'd warned her this would happen. The military's changing, he'd said years ago, but people's minds change slower. You'll have to be twice as good to get half the respect. And even then, some folks will never see you. She'd thought he was exaggerating. Now she understood he'd been preparing her. The anger came in waves. Not hot and explosive, but cold and steady. She was good at this job. She knew she was. Every qualification, every training score, every exercise proved it. But Harker and the others had decided who she was before she'd ever taken a shot, and nothing she did seemed capable of changing their minds. Iris finished reassembling her rifle and set it carefully aside. She wouldn't quit, wouldn't transfer, wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching her leave. She'd wait for the moment when her skills mattered more than their opinions. She just hoped that moment would come before someone paid the price for their prejudice. The call came on a February morning when the temperature hovered just above zero. First Platoon, Bravo Company had pushed into the mountains pursuing a high-value Taliban commander. Intelligence suggested he was hiding in a village called Kartangai, a cluster of compounds built into the mountainside with clear views of every approach. The platoon made it halfway up the valley before the ambush hit. Taliban fighters occupied positions on both ridgelines, creating a deadly crossfire. The platoon took cover behind a rock formation, pinned down with no way to advance or retreat. 2 soldiers were wounded in the initial contact. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Morrison, radioed for support. At the FOB, Captain Vance looked at Harker. "I need your team up there." Now Harker grabbed his gear. Shun and Donovan moved with him. Iris stood, reaching for her kit, but Harker held up a hand. "We only need 2 shooters for Overwatch," he said. "You stay here. Sir," Iris said. Looking at Captain Vance, "I can help." Vance hesitated. The tactical situation was deteriorating fast. First Platoon was taking effective fire from positions spread across 600 meters of mountainside. They needed every capable shooter available. "Take her," Vance said finally. "We don't have time to debate this." Harker's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Load up." The helicopter flight took 12 minutes. Iris sat across from Donovan, who wouldn't look at her. Shun checked his equipment with practiced efficiency, his face unreadable. Harker stared out the window, his expression hard. When they Landed on a ridgeline overlooking the valley, the sound of gunfire was constant. Lieutenant Morrison's voice came through on the radio, tight with stress. They had multiple casualties now. Air support was 20 minutes out. They needed suppressive fire immediately. Harker scanned the terrain through his scope, identifying targets. He started calling assignments. Chun, you take the position at 11 o'clock, 650 meters. Donovan, 3 o'clock, 580 meters. He didn't give Iris an assignment. She waited, heart pounding, then spoke up. Sergeant, where do you want me? Harker didn't. Turn around, spot for me. Call wind and corrections. Iris felt the familiar cold anger settle in her chest, but she sat up beside him and pulled out her spotting scope. Below, American soldiers were fighting for their lives, and she was being kept on the sideline. Chun took his first shot. Target down. Donovan followed seconds later. Another fire eliminated. But there were too many enemy positions, too much ground to cover. The Taliban had the advantage of terrain and preparation. Every time the American platoon tried to move, fire erupted from a new position. Then Harker's rifle jammed. He swore viciously, pulling back the charging handle. A casing had failed to eject properly, and in the cold, the mechanism was sluggish. He worked to clear it, but precious seconds were bleeding away. Iris didn't ask permission. She shifted her M110 into position, acquired the scope picture, and identified 3 targets Harker had been engaging. The range was 847 meters. Wind was gusting from the west at roughly 12 miles per hour, stronger at higher elevations. Temperature affected bullet trajectory. Altitude affected it. Angle of the shot affected it. Her father's voice, don't think. Calculate and trust. She adjusted for wind, elevation, and distance. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat steadied. The chaos of the firefight faded until there was only the scope, the target, and the space between them. First shot. A fighter dropped on the eastern ridgeline. She cycled the bolt, reacquired. Second shot. Another target down at 720 meters. Movement. On the western ridge. A fighter repositioning with an RPG, lining up a shot at the trapped platoon. The distance was 890 meters, near the effective range of her weapon. Wind was swirling unpredictably in the valley. Iris calculated the hold, adjusted for the wind shift, and squeezed the trigger. The fighter collapsed. The RPG clattered down the rocks, unexploded. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. Who's shooting? Keep it up. You're giving us room to move. Harker had cleared his jam, but he wasn't shooting. He was watching Iris through his peripheral vision, his expression stunned. She acquired another target, then another. Each shot precise, economical, final. She moved through enemy positions like she was reading a map only she could see, prioritizing threats, adjusting for conditions that changed moment to moment. Chun stopped shooting just to watch. Donovan lowered his rifle, staring. Iris fired 11 shots in 4 minutes. 11 targets at distances ranging from 580 to 920 meters, in wind conditions that made accurate shooting nearly impossible. The Taliban fighters, realizing their positions, were being systematically eliminated by someone they couldn't see, broke contact and retreated into the mountains. First platoon began moving their wounded to the evacuation point. The valley went quiet except for the wind. Back at the FOB, Captain Vance pulled the sniper team into his office. He'd reviewed the combat footage from helmet cameras and radio logs. He knew exactly what had happened on that ridgeline. He looked at Iris. 11 confirmed kills. Multiple soldiers alive because of your shooting. Lieutenant Morrison specifically mentioned you in his report. Iris didn't respond. She stood at attention, exhausted, waiting for whatever came next. Vance turned to Harker. Sergeant, I'm reassigning Specialist Calloway to primary shooter status effective immediately. She's earned it. After they were dismissed, Harker caught Iris in the hallway. His face was complicated, pride and embarrassment mixed together. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I judged you before you had a chance." "That's on me." Chun approached later, offering a nod of respect that felt more valuable than words. Even Donovan, still uncomfortable, muttered something that approximated an apology. The shift wasn't dramatic. Iris still cleaned her rifle in the team room, still kept mostly to herself. But now when she spoke during mission planning, people listened. When Harker assigned shooting positions, she got the priority targets. When new soldiers arrived and made assumptions about the quiet woman in the corner, the other snipers corrected them immediately. Word spread through the battalion about what happened in mountains. Iris became the soldier other women pointed to when someone said they didn't belong in combat roles. She became the story that fathers told daughters, about persistence and skill mattering more than size or volume. She never talked about it much. Her father had taught her that good shooting spoke for itself. The targets fell, or they didn't. Everything else was just noise. And in the mountains of Afghanistan, when soldiers needed someone who could make impossible shots in terrible conditions, they called for the quiet girl who'd been underestimated her entire life. She never missed.